Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic This Week in WordPress and SaaS. This is episode 653. Got a great entrepreneur, founder of a couple great companies. We got Gordon Gale with us, and he's got a new company, Rallyon. He's going to be telling us about this new company, about his experiences with his other company. It's going to be a great show. I'm going to let Jordan introduce himself. So would you like to give a quick 20-30-second introduction to the tribe?
Sure thing. Good to be here, Jonathan and Stephen. Thanks very much for having me on the pod. My name, like you mentioned, is Jordan Gall. I run a company called Rallyon. I used to run a company called Carthook. They're similar. They share DNA. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. I grew up in an immigrant entrepreneur household, so this was always kind of destined for me. And I live in Portland with my wife and kids, and I'm looking forward to getting into all the stuff on the professional side and how the personal impacts it, whatever we have in store.
That's great. And I've got my great co-host, Stephen. Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself to the new listeners and viewers of the tribe?
Yeah, my name's Stephen Satter from hustlefish.com.
That's great. And before we go into this great interview that I've been really looking forward to, I've got a message from one of my major sponsors. We'll be back in a few moments. We're coming back. Also like to point out, if you're interested in buying a sponsorship spot on the show, you can buy just one show, 3 months, 6 months. We've got various packages. All you have to do is go to the WP-Tonic / sponsorship, and you'll be able to see all the packages we offer. It's a great way of getting yourself in front of the WordPress community. So, Jordan, let's start off. Maybe you can just give a slightly more detailed background about your history, about why you started Carthook, and what has led to the new company. Only a small question, Jordan.
Yeah, no big deal. I think I can do it in a relatively short amount of time, and I'll get to how the two companies share a DNA. So my adventures in e-commerce started roughly 10 years ago when I started my own e-commerce company. And we were selling niche products online. We were really going after the CSN stores and net shops model. Those two companies would eventually become Wayfair and Hayneedle. But the way they started off was having hundreds of very niche sites. So we basically followed along with where they were putting their advertising dollars, and then we would clone those sites. So we had like a network of very niche sites, and that's how I got my start in e-commerce. Ran that company for about a year and then sold it off. It wasn't like a big crazy exit. It was really because we were selling products that were available elsewhere online. And in an Amazon world, that didn't feel like it was going to work out for us. You really have to get to massive scale like Wayfair and Hayneedle. So we sold it off, but that's what got me into e-commerce. And I wanted to stay in e-commerce, but move over to the software world. And that's when I launched Carthook. Carthook started off as an abandoned cart app. It was really an attempt to build a better version of a terrible piece of software that we used that gave us great ROI every month. Every month we pay like $79 a month, and this thing would make us $5,000 every single month. So I figured, you know what? I think I want to be that guy on the other end of this deal, and just built a better version of that. So we ran that for about a year and a half in the WooCommerce space, Volusion. And then when we went to do an integration with Shopify, that had me staring at the Shopify checkout for a few weeks. And from my time as an e-commerce entrepreneur and how much we optimized our checkout, I spotted what I thought was a bigger opportunity. I thought, you know what? I bet people in the Shopify space want more customization of their checkout. And so that we took a big risk and built a second product as a team of 4. And that's what the Carthook checkout turned into. And that product, took off. So we did $100 million in processing the first year in business, and then $600 million in year 2, and then over $1 billion in year 3. And our product allowed Shopify merchants to use our checkout instead of Shopify's, and we enabled a bunch of features in there. So that was great, but it set us on a collision course with Shopify because we were poking them right where the business model is, which is at the transaction layer and at the GMV and so on. So about a year ago, Shopify came to us and said, all right, we need you to stop doing that. and we need you to move over to be a supported app that does your post-purchase upsell, your most popular feature, but inside of the Shopify checkout. So two things happened at the same time. The first thing that happened was we said, yes, we should do that because that's the right thing to do for the company. And the second thing that happened, in my head, a switch turned. And that was, I'm done working with Shopify. And so I put a new CEO in place, and she's been running the company for the past year. And I went off and started Rally with Rock, who's my co-founder, and a few other people. And now we're building a checkout product, but for the rest of the web. And you could see how the freedom, that mindset that WooCommerce brings is very attractive to us, and why we are making our way into this ecosystem.
With Rally and building a checkout interface for the rest of the web, does that overlay into Shopify stuff at all, or the rest of the web except Shopify?
That's right. Everyone except Shopify. That's right.
Cool.
And the reason for that is because they do an incredibly good job at monetizing payments. And so over time, they've realized that they're effectively a checkout company with an ecosystem around it. And that's what their market cap is tied to, and their stock price and everything else. And so they've made a concerted effort to make sure that all revenue goes through their checkout. So they've had similar experiences with CartHook and with OCU, which was one of our competitors, with Recharge that handles subscriptions. And so the writing's on the wall for anyone running a checkout on Shopify. It's not going to work out. And so there's still a lot of value to add to merchants with an independent checkout that really focuses exclusively on checkout, as opposed to an e-commerce platform that has a lot of things to worry about. So that's where we fit in. We see what's happening right now in e-commerce is a pretty traditional unbundling. So Shopify did an incredibly good job at bundling the stack and making it easier for people to come online and have no code and so on. But now it's starting to become unbundled because merchants want more control. They want more control over the front end shopping experience. They want more control over the back end and what's right for them. And so in an unbundled e-commerce world, we want to play the transaction layer in a very platform agnostic way. You could do whatever you want on the front end. You could do whatever you want on the back end. And here's this great checkout for you to use instead of rebuilding yourself.
That's really interesting. The way you said it kind of comes, the flux comes back and forth. You've been quite. I went to MicroConf in Portland, and you were one of the speakers there, and you were quite, I thought, very balanced and fair about reflecting on your relationship with Shopify, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Would you like to touch that in this interview, some of the things you've reflected about your ongoing relationship with Shopify?
Sure. I think it's a really important topic because entrepreneurs, our peer group, if you want to call it, very often build on platforms. And there's big pro and a big con, right? The pro is that the audience is all bundled together. And the distribution is relatively straightforward. You kind of know, right? You can go to Built With and download sites that are using Shopify or Magento or Salesforce or WooCommerce. So you can reach them. There are app stores, there are communities, and that's what draws us to building on top of platforms. We identify gaps in the platform's functionality, and we build apps to add value to the merchants or customers of that platform. That's the pro. The con is that you are building on rented land, and that doesn't always work out for you. And it's tough to tell at the beginning whether or not it's going to work out for you. It worked out for us for quite a while. We built a great business, 25-person company, 6 million ARR, profitable, just took a little bit of friends and family money. It was basically my fantasy business. It's my dream. I used to go into the office every day. I used to fly to Slovenia to see our European office with another 10 people there every few months. I was very happy. I worked really hard. And it was really ugly the first few years. And then we got to a place where it's a fantastic company, but didn't work out for us. Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean Shopify is a bunch of like evil people. That's not really it. It's their platform and it's their right, and it is the power is in their hands to exercise to defend their business. So this happens normally. There's a great article by Chris Dixon called "Why Decentralization Matters." This is really like the article that brought me into crypto and decentralization. And I always looked at crypto and thought it was interesting, but I never understood how it fit into what we were doing until I read this article. And what it talks about is the S curve of a platform lifecycle, where on the way up, the pie gets bigger so fast, and effectively it's a party for everyone, both the platform and its complements, right? In Shopify's case, it's app developers and agencies and service providers. Everybody wins on the way up. But at the top of the S curve, as the growth starts to slow, and very often when a company goes public, there's a lot of value to be had, and there's one party in the equation that has almost all of the power, and it is their fiduciary responsibility to grab as much of that value as possible. So this isn't like a good evil thing. This is how it's done. This is just what ends up happening. And you see it in Facebook, you see it in these social platforms, you see it on Twitter, kicking people off of their API. And many of them are great companies. But as the entrepreneur without the power, you can get yourself squeezed. So I'd like to talk about that topic because maybe we were at the tip of that spear and we had a uniquely difficult experience. But it's not that unique. I know a lot of people in different ecosystems, and when you go behind the scenes and talk to founders, a lot of them are quite worried and scared of the platform, and I would love to see less of that.
As a kind of follow-through or observation, I think Shopify, in all fairness, because I'm a WordPress junkie. I make my living through WordPress. I've been doing this podcast for almost 9 years now. God help me. So I'm really engrossed in open source and the principles of WordPress. But on reflection, Shopify, they could have been a lot more nastier to you, really, couldn't they? I get them. I don't know too much about them as a company. You agree with a little bit, but compared to some other stories and how some other companies act. But the principles are just the same. Basically, they can do whatever they want, can't they?
That's right. Yeah. And as a platform matures, more of it tends to happen. Right. And so that traditional platform life cycle that all of us look at and really kind of accept as a fact of life, the exciting thing about Web3 is that it starts to challenge that as it challenges the assumption that this is the way it has to be. And that part of it is exciting, and you can tell why it would be exciting to me given my experience. And so we look to these new versions of the principles that are actually quite similar to WordPress's founding principles, and we want to apply them to commerce, and that part of it's exciting.
Because some of the concerns that you've outlined have increasingly been entering the public discussion in the WordPress community because of all the capital that's been invested in the founder's private company, Automatic, from Salesforce.com,
Mm-hmm.
an enormous injection of capital. Hundreds of millions of dollars have come from Salesforce.com into Automatic. So obviously they're going to require a return on a very large investment. And this has caused a lot of concerns, discussions, worries. So it's all linked.
Mm-hmm.
Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, I would love to dive into this idea of decentralization on an e-commerce level, because I think a lot of times when you're thinking about a website, you're also an e-commerce website, you're thinking about the website component of it and the product shopping cart checkout component of it, right? Like Shopify,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe I'm going there to sell a product, but I'm also building an entire website there. Or like Squarespace, I go there to build a website. They also have e-commerce stuff that get plugged in. Or if I'm using WordPress, I'm going to grab WooCommerce. There's just like these very standard kind of linear paths. But all of a sudden, like you're kind of talking about, no, like your website is one thing, and e-commerce is something else that's like not tied to it from a company kind of standpoint. What can you dive into that and kind of explain how that works, or what does that look like from a theory and also from a very specific sort of angle as well?
Okay, the way I look at this is, if you think about an online store, it's 2021, but almost all of the online stores we experience are very direct analogies to the offline buying experience, right? You have a homepage that's a storefront. You have category pages that are aisles. You have product pages that are standing in front of the product looking at it. Then you literally still put it into a cart, and then you go to a checkout line. So that analogy made a lot of sense 20 years ago when we were just trying to figure out, okay, how do people buy online? How do they buy offline? And let's see if we can mimic that experience and kind of match those expectations. So that's been the way online stores have been built for a really long time. But the tech now is good enough that it doesn't really have to be that way. We should be able to do whatever we want on the tech, especially on the front end buying experience. We still need to match expectations and meet expectations because people, especially around the checkout, anything you do that doesn't match expectations is bad, right? If you go city, zip, state instead of city, state, zip, all of a sudden conversion goes off. So you really have to match those expectations. I think what excites us is if you separate the checkout from the underlying platform or from an underlying platform, you do give the merchant a lot more freedom on what to do on the front end. And that helps them find the customers where they are. So right now it's very much, I'm scrolling Instagram and now I need to leave Instagram and I need to go to a product page. I need to add something to the cart. I need to put something in the checkout. I need to get to the thank you page. I need to check my email, and then I go back to Instagram. That is a disjointed experience. I think that changes a lot over the next few years. I think about virtual experiences. I think about walking around a virtual store. I've been watching Ready Player One a lot, try to picture this stuff, where this goes. And if I'm inside of Decentraland in a virtual experience and I'm going into the Nike store there, I can't leave that experience the same way and go off to a different website. So that front end buying experience needs to come all the way up to where the shopper is. In this case, it's in a virtual store. Now, at the same time, you still have to you got to get boring at some point. You need to transact, and then you need to take the order information. You need to send it back to the order management system so that someone can put it into a box and put it on a carrier and on a plane and then on a truck and get it delivered. So there's this mashup happening around front-end experience, back-end experiences, and that is made easier when the checkout can float. Right? What happens in some platforms, let's take Shopify, for example, it's relatively rigid in that you need to go to the storefront, and the storefront is a visual representation of the product database. And then you need to transact in one place at the checkout. Wherever you are, you got to get back to the checkout, and then they can handle the back-end fulfillment and order management and so on. So I think commerce changes a lot over the next few years, and an independent checkout that doesn't tell you what you can and can't do around the front-end experience is valuable.
That makes so much sense, because the reason why Shopify is easy to use, or WordPress and WooCommerce is easy to use, or Squarespace is easy to use, because they make all these expectations. The expectation is products are organized like this, products are displayed like that, and here are the options that you can have. But that automatically sticks you in this very predefined box with a predefined user journey. And you don't have that flexibility to say, what happens if somebody comes in from a different angle, which today, the angle that somebody is coming into an e-commerce store is from all over. It's not just someone's not Googling your site or going directly to it like they used to as much. There's 1,000 ways somebody can wind up there. And
that's right.
Yeah, that makes sense. If
right
you decouple that, you have that flexibility back.
That's right. Because right now, no matter where you're coming from as a traffic source, everyone's got to go to the same product page. And just from a conversion point of view alone, sending all of your varied traffic to the same product page, already that's not going to work, as well as matching the buying experience to where the traffic source is coming from.
Well, that's great. We need to go for our break. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We've had a great discussion. Jordan, obviously passionate about his product, about all this. These are the type of guests that I love when they come on the show. Before we go into the other part, the second half of the interview, I just want to point out, if you're interested in getting some recommendations about plugins, WordPress services, anything that I've used, I've got a page that recommends things that I think are best in the WordPress ecosystem. Just go to WP-Tonic/recommendations, and there'll be a whole list there for you of everything that I recommend personally. So, but I don't give any guarantees, folks. Don't come back to me if it doesn't work out for you. Let's go back into this great interview. So, I've got a two-part question here, which is good for me, Jordan. Normally they're 15 parts. So I'll make a joke of it there. So how do you see Rallyon's relationship with WooCommerce? And secondly, the wording on your website, you say a community-owned ecosystem. What does that really mean?
Sure.
And secondly, why don't you just make the thing open source?
Yes. Okay. All good questions. So that was 3, by the way.
That was 3, actually, wasn't it? It was actually. Yeah.
All right. Now I'm going to have trouble remembering all 3 parts, but the first part, let's talk about.
I do that all the time. It's terrible.
It's okay. I also speak with too many commas. All right. So let's look at WordPress. When we think of where Rally fits and which merchants will be attracted to it and which communities we want to work in, to us, it was very obvious that we were going to go toward WooCommerce. I think we share a lot of ideology and DNA with it. I like that WooCommerce puts the merchant in control, and it's also the type of merchant that wants to be in control. And our product, it really takes a set of pages in an e-commerce business's life that normally they don't really control. It's usually owned by the backend platform, and you really start to lose a lot of control when you get to the checkout. And we like to flip that on its head and say, this is completely yours, and you can do all these new stuff with it. So for a variety of reasons, it made sense to us to go toward WooCommerce. Number 2 was the community owned. What was number 3? I think maybe number 3 was better to go first.
You got community on your website. You got community owned ecosystem. What does that actually mean?
Sure. All right. So let's get into this. So hopefully, I can do a good enough job explaining this in like a minute or so. So if we think about an e-commerce, let's just think about an e-commerce platform. You have the front end, you have the back end, and then you have the transaction layer in between the two, right? The checkout. Now, and let's take Shopify's case. Where the power comes from is the checkout. That's where you can really tell people what they can and can't do. That's where you can do things like you can have features only if you use their preferred payment processing method. Things like that. So a lot of the business model ends up focused on the checkout, and a lot of the power and sometimes coercion happens at the point of checkout. So now if we look at where we want things to go, into a more headless ecosystem where the merchant really can choose their front end, choose their back end, and choose their checkout. If we want to succeed in a new environment like that, really our ideal is that we connect with a bunch of front ends and a bunch of back ends, and we become this unifying checkout layer, which is great and can be really good for the business. The issue there is if we don't watch out, we'll end up in the same exact position as Shopify, where we'll do the coercion and we'll have the power because all the payments will go through us. So if we succeed, we'll end up on the same S-curve as any other platform. And the whole goal of the company is to avoid that. And so when we think about how we avoid that and how we do it in such a way that's still financially feasible and incentivizing to ourselves, where we end up is looking toward Web3 and looking toward using a token in a very specific way. And so if you think about what Shopify does, right, they have a front end, they have a back end, and then they have a gate that goes through the middle. And that gate is the checkout, and all the transactions go through that gate, and that's the opportunity to tax that gate. So you take a portion of that as your take rate and you bring that home to your shareholders, and like a traditional business is happy. So we just have the gate. we're just building the gate, and we want to work in a cooperative way with the front end and the back end. So we kind of have to think long term in this. We can't just extract, otherwise we'll end up in fights with everybody. It won't work out for us. So instead of using our gate to take home all the value, what we want to do is take that value in the form of the payment processing revenue and drive that value into a token. And that token is earned by the merchants using the checkout as they process revenue. So as you process revenue, you earn tokens. And so what ends up happening is as the project, as the company grows, the more revenue is processed through the checkout. Instead of us keeping all of that value and revenue, it gets driven back into the token that's owned by the people who are actually driving the transactions. So in that way, it becomes an e-commerce ecosystem, a network that's owned by the merchants that are actually processing through it. Did that make sense?
You lost me a little bit, but I'm not the sharpest tool, but I don't think I'm the bluntest either, but I think you're a bit sharper than me. So we can get, so got to follow and then put it over to Steve. So how are you going to make money? Because obviously you're not a charity. And secondly, why don't you just make the whole thing open source?
Yes. So that third question I think is really, really important. It may be that in the future we do end up as open source, and really we might end up being hosted in a decentralized way, so no one can even take it down, not ourselves. But I see that as off in the future. And the reason for that is because there's nothing like a small group of very interested people to get a project off the ground. And so, I have a lot of ideology behind this, but I'm insistent on the fact that it needs to be closed source and controlled by a small group of people in the beginning. To me, that's like it gives it by far a better chance of success as opposed to an open source project off the bat.
But you've publicly stated, I feel, that you've got a $6 million investment. Those investors want a return, and you need to make a return.
That's right.
How does that work with your aspirations of it being open source?
So this is where things start to get interesting in terms of different business models in Web3. So the investors right now, they're in equity, right? They own stock in the company. In the future, what we want to do is bring on investors, including the existing investors, and move their ownership into the token instead of our company equity. And what that allows you to do is to operate almost as a public good, right? So let me explain what I mean by that. One of the things that crypto can address in an interesting way is the tragedy of the commons, right? You have a park down the block that no one cares about. It goes to hell compared to the yard in front of your house that you care about, that you maintain, right? The interesting thing that crypto can do in terms of business models is it can set up a situation where we as an independent, private, profit-motivated company can own a significant portion of the tokens. And so as long as the token value goes up, we remain financially incentivized. So the merchants can own, right, in the future, in the model, in the future, a few years out, the merchants own more of the tokens than we do. But we can still operate it from a very incentivized point of view because we all own the tokens. And as long as it's being used and the value goes up, then the company can make money also. So that's like the bigger version of it. And along the way, there's revenue in payment processing. There's payment processing partnerships, and we charge merchants directly. And as they earn tokens, they pay us less. So you start off paying us 50 basis points. And then as you earn more, you go down to 40 and then down to 30 and then down to 20 and so on. And that's part of what drives the value in the token. It's that money, instead of going to us, it's going back into the token itself.
And this idea of the token is that someone could sell that token and get, like, if I own a token, can I sell a token, or is that token just a credit for a lower price on the checkout?
You can also sell it, right? It's yours.
Okay, right. So if a transaction, 50 cents of every transaction, let's say, goes to this, skimmed off the top, goes to this token system, you guys are entitled to a certain portion of that because you own the tokens to it. As a e-commerce person, I also am entitled to part of that because I have some tokens from doing the sales. And as the community grows and gets bigger, we all develop more and more money out of these tokens from just sending more and more people through our checkout process.
That's right. So it's our job to make them as valuable as possible to own and stake as opposed to sell. So hence the discounts instead of paying full price, and governance in terms of what happens with the project, what happens with the roadmap. So we have to drive the benefit of holding on to it as high as possible, so that supply comes off of the market as opposed to gets dumped onto the market.
Do you feel like there is a roadmap in trying to educate the e-commerce people about how the system works?
Yes.
Or is that some is it fairly familiar to people with Bitcoin and all these other cryptos out there and how they kind of operate?
No, I think it's effectively, I just think of it as 0%. Right. Yes, the people who are into crypto will be attracted to it, but our assumptions and how we operate and what's in our admin and what's in our UI and so on is that you don't need to think about any of this stuff. All you know is that you're getting benefit. Yeah. And so you don't have to. Yeah, that's one of the bigger challenges. And I think that's a bigger challenge for the market as a whole, because all this infrastructure got built and all this DeFi got built, and the learning curve to get into it is preposterously high and dangerous. And so this next wave of companies like ourselves, and there's a company out there called Brain Trust, which is like a decentralized Upwork competitor. We have to build the application layer on top of this infrastructure in such a way that obfuscates all the tech and the weirdness and the danger and all that. We just need to bring the benefit up, it's a fun challenge, actually.
Right. Yeah. I think we're going to wrap up the podcast of the show. Hopefully, Georgian can stay on with us for the bonus content, which is about another 15 minutes.
Cool.
We're going to do a bit of a dive around Bitcoin, about blockchain, about, I think I'm following his vision. I just want to confirm it in the bonus content. So, Jordan, what's the best way for people to find out more about you and Rallyon?
Yes, go to rallyon.com. If you're interested in what we're talking about, go to the blog. I wrote 3 blog posts that kind of lay out a lot of the stuff about our experience, what's happening in the market, and where we're going. Especially the people out there rolling their eyes just from hearing the word crypto. I encourage you to go check it out. And then follow me on Twitter @JordanGall if you just want to say hi.
Yes, do that. I think Jordan's doing some really interesting stuff for Rallyon. It's going to be great to see where it goes. Stephen, how can people find out more about you, your thoughts, and your company?
Yeah, just head over to hustlefish.com.
That's great. And if you want to get more involved with the tribe, get some real insights of what I'm doing with the podcast, future guests, get part of the community discussion, join the WP-Tonic Facebook group. It's the WP Mastermind group, which tries to help anybody trying to make a living in the world of WordPress. So please join us there. We're always trying to encourage a bigger discussion. We'll be back next week with another fantastic guest. It's going to be our last show of 2021. And we got a great guest as well, a bit like Jordan. It's going to be a great discussion. And please join us for the bonus content, which you'll find on the WP-Tonic YouTube channel. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye. So bonus content, like what you just said. So how linking this product with blockchain, which is a two-edged sword, I would have thought. It's a lot of buzz around it. There's a lot of people making a lot of money. It has, to me, like the early days of the web, because I'm ancient, Jordan. So I was there when the web got started. And it's got the same characteristic. It's got some really enlightened, forward, great people. and it's got a lot of what I call digital drifters involved with it as well, who can, they're sharks, they can smell the blood, and they can smell the money, right? So you've got the same two crowds as the early days of the web involved in Bitcoin and blockchain. So raising this 6 million, was it a two-edged sword linking your shop, what you see, linking it to blockchain and that language?
There's definitely risk associated with it. What I will say, there's a lot less risk right now than there was a year ago or 2 years ago, and so on. When I first raised the seed round, most of the investors I spoke with were interested in Web3, but not all in. And now the investors I speak with are leaning in much, much harder from their learning, the time they're spending, and the checks that they're writing. Overall, the seed round was a new experience for me because I'm like a bootstrapper at heart, and CartHook was a little bit of friends and family money, but no institutional money. But I knew what the opportunity looked like for Rally and the speed that we needed to go at. And so it was really straightforward for me to raise VC this time.
I kind of want to dive a little bit back into this decentralization idea. With decentralizing the e-commerce checkout experience, do you feel like that makes the burden on the e-commerce shop runner, like the person that owns the shop, is it harder because now all of a sudden you don't have one unified platform? You have essentially your website, you have your e-commerce, and then you have to start thinking about how people are coming into this, where are people going, versus like this very linear, straight driven categories to the product page, to the checkout page that's kind of set out of the shop. Like what kind of burden gets shifted to the person running the store to handle this decentralization?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's one that we kind of split our brains on. And what we need to look at is that larger, more open version of e-commerce that people can send traffic from anywhere and transact anywhere. That isn't here today. And to build a product just for what will happen in the future is a little dangerous. So that's where we split, and we said to ourselves, okay, right now, what we need to do is make sure that we're meeting merchants where they are. And so our checkout was built in such a way that it is really agnostic on the front end and the back end. And what that really means is you can just use it right now and just swap out your WooCommerce checkout and get a Rally checkout instead. So the shoppers will be on a WooCommerce front end, then go to the Rally checkout, and then get sent to the WooCommerce back end for the order info. Same thing with BigCommerce, same thing with Salesforce, and so on. So it fits in to today's context without a problem. And that's almost our wedge in on don't change anything, just upgrade your checkout. Right? So if you go to our site right now, the language is really around just get a better checkout. Once we're there, we can add features and functionality that allow people to do new things. And that's part of the evolution of where things go. So we're already starting to hear feature requests that would have made no sense 6 months ago at all. Right? People are coming to us and saying, can I gate my checkout and only allow people who have a certain type of NFT in their MetaMask wallet to get into the checkout because we only want to sell merch to people from our community? Like that just didn't exist as a feature request 6 months ago. Yeah. So there's a lot of things for us to do in the future, but we have to meet merchants where they are right now, which is just giving them a better checkout. And that's it. Keep everything the same. There are some people who are building in a totally headless way, but the vast majority of GMV is happening in traditional platforms, and that's where we need to go first.
So if I'm running an e-commerce store with a traditional checkout now, I could just say, hey, you know what? Let's make our checkout a little bit better, but also build in a way that's geared towards the future And to do that, we just switch it out for Rally, plug it in, and you're kind of off to the races and good to go. You don't have to redesign your entire e-commerce system, re-upload 1,000 products, and
Yeah, you don't
figure out how to manage all of that.
That's right.
That's awesome.
Right, to get a little technical, and I'm not technical, so I'm not going to go that far. But really, what's happening is we're paying attention to the cart object. That's it. People are adding products to the cart, and when you hit buy, instead of going to the WooCommerce checkout, we grab that cart object and load it up into the Rally checkout, and then we add a bunch of features and value there. Right. So if a person goes through your checkout once, next time they come back to any Rally checkout, they're able to buy with one click. It's really similar to Shop Pay, but again, untethered from an underlying platform. So all of your returning shoppers can have a really easy time buying, and everyone else in the network has a really easy time buying on your store as well. So everyone kind of benefits the more people go through the checkout. Then you could add the post-purchase offers. You can do all these things that people want to do around the checkout, but you really haven't changed anything in your business other than those pages. Same payment processor that you're using, same backend, same email, same abandoned cart, same front end, same everything.
That's great.
That's awesome.
I've got a question, and also I want to give you some background why I'm asking you this question.
Sure.
Do you see blockchain and a decentralized, automatically regulated company structure, which some people in the blockchain world envision, like Jack from Twitter, and this whole group of people, isn't there? Do you see that concept as a way that could really finance open source projects more effectively? Because that's what really interests me. And the background why I'm asking you that question is I have a slight problem, not personally, but I have a problem with the public head of WordPress, because he has announced that he sees himself for life as the head of WordPress for life. And I see that it's an affront to my democratic principles that I adhere to. I find his statement understandable, but I find it a total affront to the basic principles that I try and run my life on. And I've publicly stated, and I've got a lot of flack for it, for making a public, that I found that totally unacceptable. But he's also taken a ton of money from Salesforce, and there's going to be long-term consequences of that. But I do understand why he took the money. But do you see this blockchain and linking it to a decentralized company as a possibility of open source to get funded an organization?
Sure. I mean, that's right. That's a complicated topic, right? And there's no black and white and easy answers to it. I sympathize with Automatic's position, because you are a private company monetizing open source software, but you don't necessarily control all of it. And as long as you don't control all of it, you can be in charge of your own private company for life if you want, right? No one's really against that. It's really the only issue is that it's such an important part of the open source component to it that I assume that's kind of where you feel the affront.
Well, it's not. It's always been there. People are just in the community just go along with it because they're all making money, making really good money, the ones that are successful. And they just go along with something they've always done. You know, it's a deal with the devil, because his involvement in the non-profit element, the foundation, and then his ownership of the private company, it's all murky. It's all unclear. He's always been done on purpose, as far as I'm concerned.
Sounds very human. Right. These people are driven by self-interest, and there are principles at play. There's self-interest at play. It's complicated. So the truth is that there's a lot around these dynamics in blockchain. There's anonymity that's used, that some people look at as like scam, but sometimes that anonymity is used as part of the effort to decentralize the actual power itself.
Well, it has a two-edged. Sorry, it's a two-edged sword.
Right. It is genuinely important that the OG Satoshi is anonymous, because it really removes the where the power lies. It's not in an individual person's hands that is treated as like this big leader of this thing. So I think it's really important that the most important crypto project of all that kicked things off has someone in the center of it that no one knows or cares about who the actual individual is. So I think to a degree, I don't know enough about open source to really have that powerful of an opinion here. But from what I see,
I'm sorry to interrupt because sure. You were very insightful about why you've set up the way you've set up your own company, because it applies to open source. Because if you just have so I'm not totally critical about how things have gone, because it's linked to what you said. If you just don't have any leadership and you just have a normal open source, I don't know how to word it.
Right, if you just launch code and hope people use it, it's difficult to get people to use it.
There's no direction. But on the other hand, why should people get involved if there's going to be no community benefit?
That's right. I think there's an opportunity for tokens to be used in open source projects as a coordinating force. It's like it's a bow to reality that humans are self-interested, and when you can wrap in their own personal gain into the things they believe in, you increase the chances of those things succeeding. So open source software is one of those things that's tailor-made for it because it's global. It doesn't need to be local. Anyone on their computer can jump on and add value. And a lot of that is already happening in crypto, specifically around DeFi and the ethos of so many things being open source, and the ability to fork. Right? It's really, it's a bit Wild West in the way that works. And I don't know if it's purely healthy, but there is certainly a dynamic between the coordinating force of a token wrapped into an open source project that we're seeing every day. It's not succeeding constantly, but there's a much more straightforward path to coordinating into the same direction when people can hold on to a piece of the project and benefit from its success. That seems to me like going with human nature as opposed to against it.
Yeah, you can't deny there's like some magic there. It's figuring out that combination, which I think like people like you and Rally are doing, and other companies out there are like how does this fit in? How does this get a community together that's all pulling in the same direction by benefiting everybody for doing something? It in some ways, in other ways, not at all, but like it kind of makes me think about like tax structure and like how the government, right, create some incentives to get people to go in a specific direction. That's for like that's how you draw a community together or get people to create a democracy that you're trying to get people to align in very certain ways. Bitcoin has this idea of doing it where there is no government, right? Where it's just the community that owns it, but you can get everybody going in the same direction by having this unifying aspect of monetary.
Yeah, I'm quite critical of Bitcoin because of the environmental consequences of mining. But blockchain, when you talk about blockchain and the possibilities around blockchain, I'm very bullish. So I have a duality about the whole thing, because when you look at, it's like what I said to you, Georgian, about the beginning of the web, because you got like a company like Tether,
that's right,
who I think I'm not speaking for you at all. I want to make that clear, but I consider the founders of Tether and the present management of Tether to be awful, absolutely awful people. But then the other side of it is blockchain and some of the things that have been developed. So you've got this kind of duality of good and bad, really, in the same thing.
People.
That's people, isn't it? I know Jordan's got to get back to his company and get
Soon.
this vision built.
That's-
So you can't spend all day with us. Thank you so much, Jordan, for being a guest. Hopefully you will agree to come back on the show sometime in the new year so we can see how your vision is going and we can have another great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. Hopefully you have. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye.